All right. Thank you everyone for attending. This is going to be the demo of general SLA dashboard replacement. So this quarter for one of our OKRs was to replace an existing Grafana dashboard with something in our metrics dashboard. So we identified that the SLA dashboard was one that was most a best case for us to replace. And so we've been diligently working with the team on how to iterate and create kind of an MVC replacement. And so Jose is going to kind of run through kind of what we have, kind of see if we're at a closer state to replace, as well as maybe some of the limitations of this MVC that we have. So take it away, Jose.
Thank you. Just beginning with, let me share my screen. There we go. So currently we have next to each other both the Grafana dashboard and the metrics dashboard for GitLab. I like to run through a couple of the limitations first, but these are things that will eventually land on GitLab. First
Can I just point something out, Jose? Sorry to interrupt, but I just want to point something out because it's going to affect your demo and it's going to affect what we're seeing on the other side. The dashboard is broken at the moment because the metrics behind it are broken. So very sorry about that. Bad timing. I tried to get that MR in today, but it hasn't been reviewed yet. But that is why there are 6 different series on the right-hand side and like multiple lines on your graphs as well. So you can see it's not a single line there. And that's because we're currently moving from Prometheus to Thanos for these metrics. And it's ongoing, unfortunately. Sorry, I just wanted to point that out because it might be confusing. And also the fact that the availability is 116% is the same problem. Okay. I wish it was 116%.
It's a great stat. Yeah, great work.
Thank you for the clarification because we were wondering that before we started the demo.
I thought it looked a little silly, but it's great that they both look they're broken in a consistent way. So
yeah,
good progress.
Okay, so having said that, a couple of the limitations that we currently have that Grafana has, but we're still working on adding to GitLab, is the single stat threshold colors. So for example, if we go to the primary service average availability per period and you see the different services such as Sidekick, API, Git, you see that the closer you are to 100%, you become green. The lower the availability, it goes to red. In our case, we just show up green. We do plan to introduce the threshold colors. Another thing that Grafana has that we currently don't support is the resizing of the panels. We're also working on adding that. The variable dropdowns. So in the case of Grafana, you can change the environment on the fly. In our case, these environments are hard-coded. This is a huge task that we're trying to undertake for 13.0. It should be hopefully available in 13.0, as well as the time range variable. So as you can see, we added this like a clarification here, 7 days, because if you change this time period here, it will only affect it will not affect it. So in the case of Grafana, if you change this to 7 days, 1 month, 1 day, it will change the query appropriately. So if your query says that you want 7 days, 1 day of data, Grafana will change it. We don't. We're also planning to support that for 13.0. Fortunately, one deployment that actually did happen was the percentile support for 12.10. We didn't used to support like percentile values, like it will show up as 1.0 or 0.98. Now we do support, so that's as close as we can get to Grafana at the moment for single stat panels. Another thing that
Jose,
is, yes,
I just wanted to jump in with one question. The hard-coded time period you're describing, where those graphs are locked to 7 days, that only applies to the single stat ones, right? Like the time series, like that time series graph will adjust based on the time period, correct?
Exactly. Only the single stat panels. Thank you.
And that's related to like a limitation in variable interpolation in our YAML scheme, and that's kind of what needs to be added in order
Correct.
to. Okay.
We can actually go through that real quick. So in our case, we have the query here for the single stat panels. As you can see, we have 7 days. If you go to Grafana and you go to the JSON definition, you can see that you have variable interpolation called range. We want to support that, the same kind of interpolation. I'm not sure we're gonna call it range. We're still like in the decision-making process of what we're gonna call it. We are currently implementing it. We just haven't quite decided what we're gonna call it. Any other questions before I move on to some of the comparisons between the dashboards? No? Okay, so one of the things that, well, we did find out that Grafana did it, but currently because the panels, all of the services are working, there was one point when one of the services, I believe it was a registry service, didn't have any data. What Grafana does is that it will not render the panel, but in the case of GitLab, if there is no data, there will be an empty state showing up. But currently, since all the single step panels have data, we cannot show you that specific scenario. The second scenario is the threshold.
Can I just be a bit specific about why that is? And it's because obviously on the single stat there's multiple series, and so it creates n single stats. Whereas obviously on the GitLab dashboards we create one for each series. So you don't have that way of kind of multiplying out the single stat panels. So, it sounds subtle, but it's quite an important difference. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that.
You beat me to it. Actually, I was going to touch on that, but thank you. So in the case of like the SLA trains primary services, one of the smaller differences is that even though the charts look alike in terms of what they're rendering, one of the things that we don't have is the threshold area that show up here like as a red area of like what's a danger zone where the availability is starting to be affected. We plan to support that. I don't remember which milestone is the one. I'm not sure. I think it's for 13.0, but I might be wrong. As far as another difference that Grafana does in between Grafana and the metrics dashboard from GitLab is that all times from Grafana are UTC, and the metrics dashboard supports local. We do have an issue to add that as a feature, so we can just toggle between UTC and local time zones. Are there any questions so far? And finally, a small difference between the Grafana dashboard and the GitLab dashboard is that we haven't added support for text panels such as this one, where it just mentions what this specific dashboard does. We do plan to support that. Again, I don't remember which issue is for which milestone this issue is scheduled for, but at the moment, this is all of the differences between Grafana as well as and the metrics dashboard, as well as what things are currently in. And we would like to ask if this is something that the SRE team would like to use as a quick replacement for the foreseeable, or is there any other issues that could block this from having the GitLab dashboard, the GitLab metrics dashboard is a replacement for the SLA dashboard?
That is a great question, Jose. And it's also a hard one to answer, but I'm going to give it a shot. So I can also give you a small demo of how I use the dashboard that you're just looking on the right side, just to see how side by side this looks like. And you can then tell me whether will be even close to getting some of these things in the GitLab dashboards. And then, sorry, Andrew, want to go?
I'm just going to say, do you want a URL for a snapshot that works, like a working version of it? Because it might be easy to explain without the craziness.
Sure.
Okay, I'll send that over in chat in a sec.
Yeah, and then I can also give a couple of suggestions on what we can do in like even the short term that will, I think, help us both the infra and development, if you don't mind. So I guess I'm just gonna wait for Andrew's dashboard. I wanted to show by the way, I shared this already with Dov yesterday, so you might already have this information, but might as well just do it in this call as well.
So yeah.
All right, cool. So my day usually starts with this dashboard, and it might not make sense for a lot of people, but because scalability is responsible for creating like a lot of capacity for GitLab.com, I need to understand the historical data before I go to future. So for me, the last 30 days is not the only range I'm looking at. I'm looking at not only like 6 hours, 7 hours. I'm not looking only 7 days. I'm looking at 30 days. I'm looking at 90 days. And in some cases, even 6 months. So that actually makes me, gives me like historical trends and allows me to, with some other dashboards, think about where we are going to go next. Obviously, this is important, but this is the least of my worries. What mostly concerns me is this dashboard and these individual ones. So a couple of things that are really important here. I regularly go, like if I change the range, and I do, I often go to this one and I highlight it. So I use this, and then I also zoom in as well. So I look at why this has actually happened here. So then I take a look at, all right, we have some of these services are dropping rapidly in this period. Okay, so I want to quickly understand why did the Sidekick service drop so low? I would go to the service dashboard, and then I would go and find, where is it, Sidekick. What Grafana does really well is it remembers these ranges. So it allows me to automatically see exactly the snapshot in time of what has actually happened on this specific service at that point in time. Obviously, right, like whether this is all gonna load now or not is a different question. But let's say I found something on this request per second. I will go in further and zoom into that one and try to understand why the RPS is so high. From that, I would go into Sidekick detail and then try to understand, for example, here, the queue detail, for example. I'm not doing an exact thing here. And then I would zoom into further into one of these dashboards. And if you can observe here, I'm going like several levels deep to understand what one service is doing. And I can't do that based on what you just presented for multiple reasons. But one of them is like, this is not, it's a very tightly connected system, and it needs to give me sufficient information without me jumping between multiple different environments to understand what is happening. So I'm trying to understand the problem, not the actual tool that I'm using. So that's a very quick demo. On to,
okay.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say thank you for the demonstration.
Yeah. So if I can suggest something else that will allow you to also do your work and also us to do our work as well without significantly impacting us both, but actually properly do the dogfooding part, is we have this same dashboard, right? Dashboard GitLab.net, we have it replicated on -gitlab.com, right? We maintain those dashboards only because we want to be able to expose, be transparent to our users, customers, and so on. Transparency value, right? Those dashboards get little love from us because we live on dashboards.gitlab.net because we need to make sure gitlab.com is working. So instead of stating that we want to replace the dashboards.gitlab.net SLA dashboard, maybe we could say that we can replace the customer-facing one and then work to provide them that value. So we are also, like Andrew, one of the reasons why a lot of these dashboards are broken is because Andrew is working on resolving some other need, which is we want to make sure that we have a customer-facing SLA, so the SLA that we will put in contracts versus monitoring SLA that we have for our own purposes, right? So contractual SLA and what we use for monitoring ourselves are going to have different targets. The reason for that is that's how industry works, basically, right? Like we want to hold ourselves to the higher standard, but we can't be paying penalties in like serious dollar amounts because we didn't deliver like 99.9999 that we are striving for in the infrastructure. So what if we replace dashboard.gitlab.com, the SLA dashboard, and direct our customers towards the GitLab facing one, and it can be on gitlab.com, thus resolving the need to depend on whether it's ops or .com. And we can dogfood it that way because it is going to be used. It has to be used by us. It has to be used by our customers because that's what we are going to be showing. And then you can also then catch up with everything else that needs to be built. Like there is a lot that you need to do as you're stating here. So this is my tiny rant, open for questions or suggestions.
Still muted, Sam.
Hey, sorry about that. Thanks for the heads up, Anthony. Yeah, hey, thanks so much, Maren, for running through that. And I think you're absolutely right that like there's two use cases that we're targeting with this dashboard. And you could kind of see that as like the split between the one we're looking at gitlab.com and the one that's on ops.gitlab.net, where there's kind of a public facing like transparency use case for this dashboard, which there's kind of one set of criteria that we need to meet for it to be useful there. And then there's the kind of SRE operational use cases, which I think you're diving into there. And I think it seems like, I mean, I've been interested to understand those more. It seems like maybe to summarize what you presented there, it's really, it's something that you're using to analyze, kind of as a jumping off point to analyze trends and kind of direction and stability. It's probably not something that you're typically using, like if something is, seriously on fire and like that, maybe as an initial spot to triage it, but I'd imagine you're going in through a different place. So, in terms of like the kind of cutover and the dog fooding progression, really what, we've targeted this dashboard, the idea, and this is something that I think is important to the success here is, we want to at some point soon be able to turn off a Grafana dashboard because that really starts to push us, towards like, you can't say it's just on the side and we're not using it. And so, and in terms of how we want to phase that out, we'd like to, this dashboard, it's referenced in the handbook as an SLA dashboard. We'd like to update that at some point soon to point to the GitLab version of it. And then at some point, kind of shortly following that, we would like to be able to basically remove the Grafana version, so that we can say, at least for this one piece, we're using the GitLab version. And I think that that'll really help, just expose more of the types of things that you're describing in terms of usability or improvements. And then kind of the follow-up goal, kind of where we're headed towards, and we're talking about this in terms of the next quarter's goal for APM, but, is to be able to then kind of complete the UX experience around these dashboards. I say what we have now, you're seeing the right data. It's kind of it's there, it's hooked up. But in terms of the kind of usability of locking timeframes and being able to pivot through a lot of different dashboards, I think those workflows, as you point out, are going to be challenging in the current state. So the idea with 13.0 and maybe 13.1 is to really, as that framework becomes more fleshed out, then we can start to look at a more full sail migration, in terms of, like where you're doing that analysis.
Sam, I totally get what you're aiming at and like what you're trying to accomplish here, but you have to also remember that we are trying to keep the lights on a very important system for this company. So what you're telling me right now is basically you're giving me a prize to race in the Formula One track, and with the point that it's gonna become a Formula One at some point, right? But that doesn't work for us because we right now need to race. Right, like now, the pressure on infra department is to have enterprise-grade performance SaaS platform, and you're telling me that you're going to remove one of the pieces of tool that are very much connected. Like I showed you, like even if it seems like it's not an important dashboard, it showed you like where it is all connected. It informs decisions, and if I'm going to battling with bugs, when I need to make a decision immediately on the stability of this platform, it's going to be very challenging. It's not only going to be challenging, it's going to be catastrophic for us in some cases.
Yeah, and I completely understand that. I mean, the goal here, just to be explicit from my perspective, is not to cripple or inhibit our ability to operate the site in any way. And so there's some balance, in terms of how we, how do we iterate on this if it is, if these features that we're building are really in a business critical workflow that is high stakes, ultimately, how do we make progress there and not kind of get stuck in this pattern of, it's never quite there, it's never quite there. And so, that's what we're looking at here. I think that, it seems like from this conversation, we all feel pretty comfortable with saying, well, the public version of this, the GitLab.com version of this, that we would direct customers or, the public towards, there's the weird things about the time locking and, blah, blah, blah. It's only 2 in a row, but like that it works for that use case. And so, that's progress for us. The bigger check, is like when we can say, shut down the other one because we don't need this one anymore. And, we do want to get there, but I think that, what we want to do is get there in a context where, even if there's some inconvenience around it, it's kind of at that level where it's like, oh, well, maybe there's one extra click or step, for now, which is well understood, versus like, you can't do the important work you're describing. Like you're actually, you're losing visibility into something that you need visibility into.
Right, but you're talking about a completely different time frame. Like I agree with you, like we want to remove it at some point, but I can't, like based on what I'm seeing right now, how do we do that in 1 quarter? Like seriously, that's not gonna work. Like regardless of whether it's a mission critical dashboard or not, it gives us insight in the behavior of our system. So if you wanna tell us that we need to remove something like that in 2 months, I'm extremely skeptical. I'm fine with doing that for a contractual SLA where you're going to have decisions that are completely different to the one that is monitoring one, right? Like I said, Andrew is doing the split between contractual and monitoring one. If the contractual one is the one that you want to replace, I'm perfectly fine with that because
I think that's what we want to keep iterating on is kind of what is the right break there, because to do it all right, as you're saying, like that may be a long-term thing. There may be, far into the future, just things that it doesn't make sense to replace. But how do we break out those use cases and continue to say, oh, for these types of things, it's serving that purpose, and as a result, we're driving the functionality forward because we have more focused feedback on that. I had one question. I know we're up on time here, but all of the dashboards that you went through there and kind of that, you know, analysis workflow you demoed, are those are all driven off the JS Sonnet in runbooks?
That's
As
right.
far as I know,
it
yes.
is.
Okay, yeah,
It is,
yeah,
yeah.
okay, great. Because I think that that's a really powerful tool here too, is that the fact that you have all of this in infrastructure as code and this nice pipeline for how you manage and deploy those, and then we've been able to, you know, kind of fork that pipeline and produce a bunch of dashboards that, you know, maybe aren't at the same level of usability, but, you know, they're there, you know, then it starts to let us be a lot more flexible in terms of, you know, I think ultimately we want to say, oh, turn the other stuff off because that really proves that, you know, we've done it. But, you know, to say we can see those things progress in parallel and, you know, start to shift more use cases towards the GitLab versions as they get more mature, and not have to like, you know, argue over like a hard cutover date, you know, that like on this date we're going to, you know, we have to switch everything. Like we can do it more gradually.
Cool. So back to the SLA dashboard, it sounds like we're all more in agreement on the contractual replacement one. How can we move forward with that? Trying to understand next steps.
Yeah.
You continue building the same thing you're building for this one, because this dashboard is going to just have to, it's going to be different. It's going to be showing different numbers, right? And there is not much difference for you there. It's just, please don't state that you're going to remove all of the Grafana SLA dashboards. That's what I'm trying to say. And you can correct me here. And I need to leave. I have a meeting in 1 minute.
Yeah.
But Andrew, you can.
The next step for us is we're going to kind of do a bit of work on our side, and we'll need to update some of the queries that you use, Jose, but they're trivial changes. And then, cheers, Maren. Then we just need to, sorry, everyone is going. We just need to kind of do a bit of polish and figure out what the defaults for a user would be that are different from the defaults that we have. For 7 days probably isn't what they're looking for, I would guess, and talk about that a bit. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Good to see y'all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, cool.